Well, good morning. Happy New Year. I'm not going to be that pastor that says I haven't seen you guys in a year, so I promise I won't say that. But it's good to see you guys. A lot of good faces here this morning. I'm actually really surprised. I'm pleasantly surprised that you're here. That's not casting judgment on anyone. I'm glad to see all you guys here today. That's great. Whether it's 2022 New Year, got to get back to church, or whatever it is, I'll take it. I'm glad you're here. Let's just say that. Hey, a couple announcements. As you walked in the coffee bar, you saw that it was decorated for a baby shower. Liz and Andy Jenkins are about to have a baby this month. They're actually upstairs working in our kids program. They work once a month. They volunteer in our Upstreet program, and they're about to have a new addition, and so we're going to celebrate with them. And so everyone is invited to stick around if you want to afterwards. We're going to have some food out in the coffee bar and just hang out for a few moments with them and just celebrate with them. But you're all invited to be a part of that if you guys want to. If you don't know who Liz and Andy are, it's a good chance to meet them and the two boys that they already have, and now they're welcoming their third boy coming in just a couple weeks. So there's that. Second thing I have for you is back in November, we had scheduled for Liz to come and share her story, where we were talking about the risks and the stats on suicide when we were doing our inclusion series, and she was going to share her story, and so we've invited her to come back and have a chance to do that on the 30th. So Sunday the 30th, which is in like 3 weeks, Liz is going to be up here and she's going to share her story. So inviting you to be there. The reason we want to get that announcement out is because we know that many of you have been affected by suicide or suicide loss, or know someone that could really be it would be helpful for them to come and hear this story. And so we're inviting you to come be a part of that. We're going to also have something that night. We're calling it, we really don't have a good name for it. We're calling it a Grief Observed. We're going to have a gathering that evening where we can come together and kind of just share stories, have a chance for healing, for prayer, for just a chance to unload some of those stories that you might have. And so we're inviting you the 30th to come that morning to listen to Liz's story, and then back that later on that evening to kind of share, if you'd like, your story or just hear other people's stories and support them. But that's coming up this month. So moving into 2022, we don't want to forget 2021. So here's what we're going to do. Our first job this morning, I got a lot of questions that we're going to ask today. I wasn't sure how many people were going to come today. I was thinking we might have 3, 4, 5 people. Wasn't sure. The snow outside is heavy, and so I didn't know if it would keep you away. But my first question for you guys today, and I want you to do this as a table talk question, is I want one word to describe 2021. So I want you to think of one word for you that would describe 2021, and then I want you to share it with those around you, and then we're going to come back together. One word for 2021. Okay, hopefully you had a chance to share. I switched mics, so you might have noticed that. Hopefully you had a chance to share. Anyone want to throw out what a word was that they put out there? Anyone want to give me a word? I'm not really good at hearing, so you might have to. Adaptation. Okay, what else? I'm asking for the word we just talked about. Will anyone else have a word? Just only one person did this? Come on. This is going to be a long day. I have a lot of questions, and we're only getting one answer. This is not a very good class. We're going to have to do homework. Intense? I heard something over here. What? Challenging, yes. Growth? If I get something wrong, just repeat it, because I don't have really good hearing. I'm getting there. Yes, 7. Emotional. Yeah, 2021 was emotional. Abiding? Divided, yes, that would describe 2021, 2020, 2019, 2018, 2017, 2016, and before probably. But yeah, anything else? All right, you'll have to save it for the next one. I just passed out a yellow card stock. Did everyone get one? If not, I know there's extras in the back, but you got a yellow card stock because you're going to write down some things because I want you to remember these questions for you. And I'm not going to ask them right now. I'm going to ask them periodically through the story here. But I wanted you to have those, that card stock there to write on. We're going to do something different today. Again, I didn't know how to approach it. I didn't know how many people we'd have. It's New Year. We're going to try new things, right? I do hope everyone had a good holiday season. But what I want to talk about today is church after COVID. And I kind of like put quotes on the word after, like church post-COVID, because I know that we are still in the throngs, that you say? Still in the throngs, still in the middle of the throes, I heard, the middle of COVID. I mean, we don't know when it's going to end. We don't know what's coming next. I don't have a rah-rah New Year's Day message for you. I'm not going to ask you for your resolutions list if you made one. And it's not that I'm not hopeful for 2022, because I am. But I'm wondering, as a pastor, as a leader in a faith community, what is the church going to look like going forward? Well, a lot of things have changed. I was struggling with what I wanted to talk about today, and not just today, but the Sundays moving forward. Usually, I come out of the new year and I'm like, all right, this is the next series. We're going to go into this, and I got this idea, and I was kind of stuck because I'm like, man. The last 4 years and the last 2 specifically have really taken its toll on me, on you, on this church, and it's been hard to really get motivated or hopeful or excited about what's happening when there's so many questions unanswered. But I want to have this conversation with you today about this, because I think that not just our church, but churches all over the country, all over the world, from what I gather from the conversations I've been a part of with other pastors around the country, is that we're all facing this pivotal moment in our journey. What's next? Where do we go from here? Will we make it? Will we survive COVID? And so here's the question. First question I want you to write down or answer on your papers. Why are you here this morning? Like, what got you out of bed this week or last week or next week? Why are you here this morning? I want you to write down. It could be anything. I mean, just maybe you were invited this week or reminded this week, or you saw something on Facebook. But why are you here this morning? I think this is an important question for all of us to know the answer for, of why we came, of why are we here. I think COVID has caused all of us to answer the question, do I need to go to church, right? Like, what's the purpose? What are the functions of the local church? Why do I go? What does it do for me? What benefit is it for me? It's been almost 2 years ago, March, I was in Guatemala, and we got word of all the shutdowns that were happening for COVID. And I made a call from 1,000 miles away that, hey, we're shutting down. We're not going to have service that Sunday. We wouldn't even be there. We'd still be in Guatemala, headed back. We weren't sure if we were coming back from Guatemala. Like, canceling flights was happening in that moment. And so we had to find a second. They had to find a second plane to get us out of the country. Later on that afternoon, we had heard from another group that they were stuck. And I think they ended up spending the next month and a half to 2 months, a group of teenagers with their church down in Guatemala, stuck down there because they couldn't fly out of the country. And so, I mean, it was real. We canceled it. I took a lot of heat in that moment because it was still like unsure. It wasn't the popular thing to do around here, was to close down, but we did. But we discovered soon that there's radio and there's TV and internet, and we can watch any church we wanted to, and we can watch any preacher or any spiritual guy that we wanted to. But it was a rough 12 months, and they weren't my favorite. I was talking to Liz right before the service. I said, one of the things, though, that I loved is I felt the closest in a long time to Matt, Jody, Debbie, Braden, Tammy, Liz, Cannon. Every Sunday morning we gathered here still. They still came at 8 o'clock, 8:30 sometimes, Braden. But we got here and we would just spend time in conversation. Hey, we're going to talk about this today. Or, hey, we're going to sing these songs, and this is why we picked these songs today. And some of those, if you watched it all online, you saw that we would often have a guest panel where we might all have a microphone, and we all were answering questions and talking about things. But I sort of missed that. I was told that to Liz today. I missed that piece of it. But I missed even more was you guys. It was like your faces being here. Like, I hated the fact that we were just unsure about gathering back together. And so why do we need to get together? Why do we need church? And this was the question that we wrestled. I think I came every Sunday morning, and there was this tension of like, when are we getting back? When are we getting back? And I'd say, hey guys, why do we need to get back together? Like, why do we need to rush it? Why? Tell me why we need to have people here. And we'd wrestle with that question of like, what role does the church play in our lives? I want you to watch this short video here. It's a woman who's also a pastor, and she was asked this question about what the role the church plays in her life.
The role of the church is to proclaim in our living the story of God.
Oh, this actually sounds interesting. What is that? That sounds cool.
Yeah. Church to me is, well, I have a really broad definition of church. It doesn't take much for me to think that's church. I could point to so many things that other people don't say is church and say that it's church. So my ecclesiology is pretty broad, but I think the church is just basically two things: worship and practice. It's worship in that we come together and we proclaim things, partly to remind each other and partly to remind ourselves that we believe them. That's what liturgy's for, right? That's why we read scripture and we do the same kinds of things. That's why we sing. We do all those things as a form of worship, which is, yes, telling God how we feel about God, but it's also telling us how we feel about God so that we remember. And then the other thing that church is for practice. It's where we go intentionally in community to practice being God's people. So
Collect money.
if we do something good with it, share our lives with each other, sit next to somebody that we really don't agree with, break bread with somebody that's not our favorite, work to talk respectfully with a bunch of people that have different personalities and different interests and different viewpoints, extend grace and love and forgive people. It's the messiness of just practice. And then we try to help each other by saying, okay, here's one thing I've learned. I'm going to share with you. At least at our church, we do discussion more than we do sermon. And it's a lot of conversation about, here's how I do that, or here's what I'm thinking. And it's kind of a lab. It's a practice area. It's a way for us to say, okay, these are some things that help us. And then, okay, let's try some of those things. Let's try to pray these different ways, or let's try to do these different spiritual practices. So, yeah, worship is about proclaiming to God and to us, to each other, to ourselves. And practice is just to make it real so that we actually have to put our money where our mouth is.
So the same question goes to you. What role does the church play or should play in your life? So your first question was, why are you here today? Second one is, what role does the church play or should play in your lives? So it kind of ties into the why you came. Like, what role is it playing in your life? we'd have this conversation almost every Sunday, like I said, in that little small group before we would go live. And it always came back to these, it seemed like the same two reasons that we'd end up on. And one was similar to hers. We said practice. Like this is a place, the church community is a place where you can go and practice your faith together. And the other one that was even stronger was presence. Not gifts, like we're not giving you anything, but presence as in like you physically being here, being together was the thing that we longed for. I think we all, if we would admit it and we'd be honest, we long for human touch. We long for community. And the church is where we get together and we get to be together and we get to practice our faith. When it comes to presence, with COVID came this need for social distancing, right? But being together mattered. Connection is important. And not being together to worship, not being together to fellowship or to live our faith, it was hard. And I remember being very excited about starting our outdoor services, like Easter Sunday, man, we're going to do it. We're going to go outside. And now we're back indoors again. And I love it, but I got to be honest with you. My anxiety, it gets high because I want us to be smart. I want us to be safe. I want our kids to be safe, and I want to be able to see you at the same time and be with you, but I don't know. I asked a pastor friend that was in town yesterday. I said, "What are churches doing again? Are we shutting down again?" He's like, "You know what? It's yes and no. I mean, it depends." I went online today and I got messages from a couple people that, hey, our churches next 2 weeks we're online only, and I'm like, man, I don't want to do that. I know the cases are higher than they've ever been. If you believe it or not, they're higher than they've ever been. But I don't know if we relationship-wise survive another time like that. And so Brian McLaren in his book, We Make the Road by Walking, he says this when it comes to the presence, the being together piece. He says the church has a term for what we experience when together. It's called fellowship. Fellowship is a kind of belonging that isn't based on status, achievement, or gender, but instead is based on a deep belief that everyone matters, everyone is welcome, and everyone is loved. No conditions, no exceptions. It's not the kind of belonging you find at the top of the ladder among those who think that they are the best, but at the bottom among all the rest, with all the other failures and losers who have been either climbed the ladder and fallen or never gotten enough gumption to climb in the first place. For people who want to believe but aren't sure what or how to believe, when we come together just as we are, we begin to rise again, believe again, hope again, and to live again. He says, through fellowship, space is created so that the Holy Spirit fills us with a deep breath of fresh air. So presence is a big piece of why we get together. The other is practice. That's what today's kind of message title was, is presence and practice. We need to be together, but why do we get together? She talked about in that video, and we're going to hear a little bit more later in another, that the sacraments are a huge piece, a huge reason why the church exists. And so you may be familiar with sacraments like baptism and communion and marriage, things that the church does together, but there are so many more spiritual disciplines that we practice together as a faith community. And I listed a few here: meditation and prayer, fasting, study, hospitality, listening, simplicity, solitude, confession, worship, submission, service, guidance, celebration, Sabbath, journaling, generosity, Bible reading, fellowship, healing of the sick. Those are a lot of things that we do together. Those are sacraments or spiritual disciplines of our faith. And so what we're going to do for the next foreseeable future, the next years, we're going to teach and we're going to intentionally practice some of these spiritual disciplines together. And so you're going to see us kind of bring one or two of these up each month, and then we're going to have some sort of activity or event that allows us all to participate together. I mean, it's the reason why we come. It's not just to hear a message and to listen to some music, but to actually to live our faith together. So we're going to have presence and we're going to practice. In her book, Searching for Sunday, which is a fantastic read, Rachel Held Evans, who passed away just a little over a year ago, very young, died very suddenly, but she was a leader kind of in this faith movement. And she's written a few great books that we've read together as small groups and that we've encouraged you to read. But in her book, Searching for Sundays, she says, "The sacraments invited me to touch, smell, taste, hear, and see God in the stuff of everyday life again. They got God out of my head and into my hands. They reminded me that Christianity isn't meant to simply be believed. It's meant to be lived, shared, eaten, spoken, and enacted in the presence of other people. They reminded me that try as I may, I can't be a Christian on my own. I need a community. I need the church. The church tells us that we are beloved, baptism. The church tells us that we are broken in confession. The church tells us that we are commissioned with purpose. The church feeds us in communion. The church welcomes us in hospitality. The church anoints us with healing of the sick. And the church unites us in marriage. Of course, the church can lie, injure, damage, and exclude. But for a generation that is struggling to make sense of what church is for, the sacraments remind us to taste and see that the Lord is good and maybe not give up. I hope they remind us of how badly we need one another. Pulled out a few scriptures in our ancient text that I wanted to read you that kind of deal with this idea of why the church exists and what it's supposed to be. And they're going to be on the screen behind me. The first one's found in Ephesians 4. Verse 11 says this: He gave some apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers. His purpose was to equip God's people for the work of serving and building up the body of Christ until we all reach the unity of faith and knowledge of God's Son. God's goal is for us to become mature adults, to be fully grown, measured by the standard of the fullness of Christ. In Acts 2, verse 42, the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the community, to the shared meals and their prayers. A sense of awe came over them. God performed many wonders and signs through the apostles. All the believers were united, and they shared everything. They would sell pieces of property and possessions and distribute the proceeds to everyone who needed them. Every day they met together in the temple and ate at their homes. They shared food with gladness and simplicity. They praised God and demonstrated God's goodness to everyone. And the Lord added daily to the community those who were being saved. And the last one is in Hebrews. And this one is kind of often used and misused, I would say, and I put that disclaimer, and I'll tell you why here in a second. But verse 23 of chapter 10 of Hebrews: Let's hold on to the confession of our hope without wavering, because the one who made the promises is reliable. And let us consider each other carefully for the purpose of sparking love and good deeds. Don't stop meeting together with other believers, which some people have gotten into the habit of doing. Instead, encourage each other, especially as you see the day drawing near. Now, I know that scripture has probably, you've heard it been used to like tell you why you need to be at church on Sunday mornings and Sunday nights and Wednesday nights and, Friday afternoons or whatever it is. There was this, I heard this week. I was listening to a podcast and they called it, has anyone ever heard 3 to thrive? You go to church 3 to thrive. You got to go there 3 times a week to thrive, for your faith to thrive. That's what it was. Playing word. I guess no one heard it. Good. You didn't have to unlearn that then. But this idea that you have to be at church all the time, and we've never been that at the Grove. We haven't had Sunday night services. We've done small groups. We've tried to get you to engage in people's homes or get together here if it works out. But we've never been like, hey, you got to be at church every time. We don't take attendance here. Good thing, right? We've never been that church. Many of you, and it's not just you, it's across the board. You're talking to anyone, like once a month is kind of like the average. Now, I'd love for us to have a higher average, but that's kind of what it is. But I would never use that verse to tell you that God says you got to be at church. I mean, what that verse is dealing with it. There are people that have come to a point that said, hey, I'm done with it. I'm not going back to church. I don't need it. I don't need community. I don't need to be around other people that believe. I'm done with it. That's probably more speaking to them than it is the person that says, hey, my kid's playing softball this weekend. I'm not going to be at church. Or, hey, I'm not feeling well. Or, hey, I got friends in town and we're going to go for a hike. It's not referring to things like, where you're in and out. I really feel like it's speaking to those that have said, hey, I'm done with it. I don't need it. Because I would disagree. I would disagree that we do need it. And there's a reason to gather, but it's been hard. It's been hard the last 2 years. And so here's the next question. What lessons have you learned in the last 2 years? Like, what has COVID taught you about yourself or humanity? So maybe it's not the biggest, like, don't feel like, hey, I gotta have this amazing answer, but what's something that you've learned in the last 2 years? Like, what has COVID taught you about yourself or humanity as a whole? What has it taught you? I see some of you aren't writing. I'm marking that down. No. What have you learned? Someone give me an answer. What's something you learned in the last 2 years about yourself or about humanity? What COVID taught you? Anyone? Now you're writing down. What's that? How much we need each other. Thank you, Roland. Anything else? What has COVID taught you? 7. To be more patient. You were pulling your mask down. So tell you to slow down, like that it was okay to slow down? Did anyone struggle with that, like not having things to do, like I need to slow down. I can do it now. I know it's not part of my Enneagram 8, but I do feel like chaos and busyness is something I want to have, and so it is hard for me to slow down. I know a lot of people, maybe this is you, they loved the fact that it was isolation, like that was their thing. They're like, man, I can retreat now, but it became unhealthy. I mean, they would admit it and say, hey, I took advantage of the fact that I was isolated, and I lived in my basement for 2 years, Anything else? What else have you learned? Anyone else learn anything from COVID? All right, I'm going to tell you 2 things that I think that we learned, and Roland, you touched on one of them. And I think the church has learned this really well. One is that human bodies matter. And the second is that relational fractures, political fractures, ecclesiastical fractures, which is the church, that those are real. With human bodies, we've realized the fragility of life. Yesterday, I think the total was 836,000 deaths in the United States. I'm not going to argue whether or not you believe that or not, but 836,000 COVID deaths is listed. A lot of you have lost people. Every day we're hearing a new story. Hey, when someone passes away, what's the first question you ask? Do they have COVID, right? I mean, if we'd admit it, we know it's impacting a lot of us. We saw with Black Lives Matter and racism over the last few years that human bodies matter to people, right? The feeling of being separated and invisible to people when you're in quarantine. How many people had to quarantine? I'm not asking if you were sick. I'm just saying, and you had to quarantine maybe from close contact and like that. I mean, almost all of us at some point had to be like, I can't be around other people. That's miserable, right? I mean, when you can control it and say, hey, I don't want to be around people, I'm going home today, but when you're like forced for 5, 10, 14 days to be, I remember the first Christmas, it was, volleyball team at the high school got it, and our house had to shut down because we had a kid on the volleyball team, and that's what Christmas was. We pushed plates to her door, and back then we're like, we can't even come near you. You can't come out here. I mean, Maisie will tell you she was in her room and wasn't allowed to come out of her room. Christmas morning was the first time she came out, and she sat alone, mask on, opening her presents, and I'm like, hey, we don't know what's going on. We all wore masks while we opened presents on Christmas morning because, again, it was new. We weren't sure, and then the second piece, the fracture piece, the relational fractures, the political, the church fractures, right? We realize that those don't happen overnight. Like, there are things lying beneath, and they manifest themselves when they're under duress or under tension. And we saw that happen with losing. We've all experienced loss, right? Whether we've lost a loved one, a job, our marriages are falling apart, education we've missed out on, some of our kids, high school moments have been missed out on, people who are still alive, right? I heard that this week for the first time, and it kind of hit me that this idea of grieving those that are still alive. Like, how many of you, don't have to raise your hand, but are grieving someone that is still alive? Jody and I know we've grown distant and broken with some family members and with people that were a part of this community that have left over the last few years. That things that were lying underneath, and when we would say things or disagree on maybe a political or a gospel issue, that it caused these fractures, and they weren't overnight fractures. They would happen, and we've all experienced that. And so I want you to write that down, because I want you to take a moment with that. Is who or what have you lost during COVID? If you wouldn't mind raising your hand, have you lost someone, lost a loved one during the last 2 years to COVID or something? I mean, you look around. I mean, you have no idea, the person sitting next to you, what they've lost, who they lost. What is your experience with fractured relationships with someone? Like, have you experienced that? Have you had to grieve someone that's still alive? And how do you grieve that? Did you grieve it? Like, is it lying underneath waiting to explode? Have you talked about it with anyone? If you can't think of someone or something, maybe write down, like, what do you miss the most, or what do you appreciate the most out of COVID? So maybe you can't think of someone that you lost, but maybe something that you've lost, something that you miss. So how does the church survive COVID? A couple things that I listened to this week, they talked about these, and I wanted to bring them to you, is things that we must avoid as a church moving forward to survive this. And one is to be careful not to romanticize the past. Man, I love church when we did this. Or, man, church was so much better when we were doing that. And it's not just a COVID issue, right? It's been an issue for churchgoers forever. Man, I miss Sunday school, or I miss Wednesday night services, or I miss our small group, or I miss the drummer, right? I wish we still had this, or I wish we still had brownies and a bowl full of peanut M&Ms every Sunday morning in the coffee bar. Anybody miss the brownies? You've been here those are the people who have been here the longest. Debbie, you see her hands, right? Debbie used to make brownies every Sunday morning, and then she'd have a bowl of peanut M&Ms. And we had to stop because people thought that was a to-go bowl, and they would, like, if you remember, they would take to-go trays, because we had a lot of food, and they would just pile in peanut M&Ms into the to-go boxes. I'm like, no. Now we can't have a bowl of candy like that because of COVID, right? I'm not eating that. All right. We look back and we wish things were the way they were, right? This is us. This is the challenge of God's people when they were in the Old Testament story of going through the desert. And Moses had been set to set them free out of delivery. He delivered a message to Pharaoh and delivered them out of slavery. And then they wandered in the desert for years and years, right? And they began to long to be in slavery. In his book, We Make the Road by Walking, I want to read this piece from Brian McLaren. He says, the wilderness journey, so this is what we're on, right? The wilderness journey is always difficult and seems to last forever. Like kids on a car ride, we keep whining, are we there yet? But the truth is we arrive before we've learned the lessons of the wilderness, we won't be able to enjoy the freedom that awaits us in the promised land beyond it. There is wisdom when we will need there when we can gain only right there, only here and now on the wilderness road. There is moral muscle that we need then and that we can exercise and strengthen only through our struggles on this road here and now. There is a depth of connection with God that will be there when we need it in the future, if we learn to trust and follow God now on the long, wild road to freedom. The struggles will make us either bitter or better. The trials will lead to either break down or break through. We will often be tempted to return to our old lives, But in that tension between a backward pull and a forward call, we will discover unexplainable sustenance like manna, and an unexpected refreshment like springs in the desert. Against all odds, walking by faith, we will survive, and more, we will learn what it means to be alive. There are no shortcuts. The road cannot be made by wishing, by whining, or by talking. It can be made only by walking day after day, step by step, struggle by struggle. It's easier, it turns out, to get people out of slavery than it is to get slavery out of people. So people, let us walk the road right through the middle of the desert. To be alive is to be present in the present, right? Not to just long for how things used to be. So we need to avoid romanticizing the past. The second thing they said is we need to be careful to stop living. Like, fear is paralyzing, right? Without raising your hands, how many of you would admit that there have been times in the last 2 years that you wanted to quit something? Like quit your job, quit school, quit your kids, right? Quit marriage, quit your life if you were honest. If I was completely honest with you, something still doesn't feel right. Like there's this heaviness that I feel, and I felt it for a while. And it's not just in the physical body, although my age is telling me it is. It's deeper. And I wonder how many of us feel that same way. And so I'm going to ask you a question. You don't need to write down the answers to these next questions. I want you just to think about them. You're welcome to write them down, but I want you to think about these. These are a little bit more personal for you. I want to ask you, how is your soul? Like, how would you answer that if someone asked you, how's your soul? The inner being of your body. How is your soul? Like, we have the outer life. We have our jobs, our family, our image, education, money. We spend most of the time and our energy keeping up with those things. And the truth is that I would bet that most of us are exhausted. We have this inner life, this place where very few people have access to. We don't give keys out to this place. And many of us are dying. There's pain, there's hurt, there's brokenness, there's tiredness. And then we complicate that by coming to church, right? Because in the church world, we don't want anyone to know what's really going on inside of us. And so we hide behind a smile and a clean shirt. We don't want anyone to see how dark it might be inside. Not at church, not the one place that we should actually be honest with each other, right? And so the question is how is your soul this morning? If you were to turn to the person next to you and tell them the current condition of your soul, how would you even begin to answer that? When it comes to the health of your soul, how do you measure it? What gauge do you use, right? What unit of measurement? Like how do you quantify how good your soul is? In John, the third book of John, chapter 2, he says, "Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well." What does he mean? What does he mean, your soul getting along well? Is it based on how good you feel from day to day? Is your job going good? Things at home are good? The marriage, how you doing with the kids? Does that determine it? Is it related to your finances, right? Like the checking account is good, or I have money in my savings account, so I'm doing good. Is your soul good? Is it bad? How would you finish this sentence? My soul is good because blank, or my soul is bad because blank. Like how do you personally quantify the shape your soul is in? Maybe a scale from 1 to 10 would help. Like 1 being the darkest and 10 being the best it's ever been. Like how would you rate your scale? Where would you be on that? 1 to 10. It's a new year, maybe new resolutions, goals. They're good things, right? But I think too often we set these lofty, sometimes unrealistic goals for the next year. And so what if instead of making resolutions that we probably won't keep, what if instead we made it a priority to move in the right direction. Like looking at that 1 to 10 scale, that we want to move further from the one side, right? Like instead of saying in 2022, I'm going to be blank or I'm going to do blank, you said that this next year, I want to have made progress towards being this. I want to be healthy. I want to be better. My soul is at a 2. I want to be closer to a 6. You know, if you set it at a 10, you might leave no room for growth. I'm excited for you if it's a 10, but you might feel defeated when something goes wrong. But no matter what your goal or your resolution that you make, when it comes to the inside, when it comes to your soul or your worth, we should all agree that the longer you go neglecting it, the darker it gets. In Matthew 16, it says, "What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul?" Or in other words, what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? From some writings from the book of Psalms. "Truly my soul finds rest in God. My salvation comes from him," in Psalm 62. "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well." Psalms 139. "Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God." Psalms 42. I think part of the job for the church, for the community, is to help take care of each other on the inside as well. And so the question is how is your soul? Do you want to make it better? Is that why you came? Is that why you're here today? You have a longing to be with people, to practice your faith, but also this desire to be healthy inside. I'm going to invite Liz. She's going to sing a song called "Fall Afresh." And I want us to take a moment, and I want us to process that question. I want us to each take this personal inventory, this to evaluate, like to check in and to be honest with yourself. How is your soul? What do you need from God? What do you need from this community to make it better? These are the lyrics to the song. It says, "Awaken my soul, come awake, to hunger, to seek, to thirst. Awaken first love, come awake and do as you did at first. Spirit of the living God, come, fall afresh on me. Come wake me from my sleep, blow through the caverns of my soul. Pour in me to overflow. Spirit, come, fill this place. Let your glory now invade." I want to invite you to stay seated, and I want you to listen to the song and process it how you may. Take a moment to just evaluate where you're at.
Y'all stand with me. Having everybody here while I sing is what I missed about us not being together. Mercy, please come Y'all can be seated.
So one of the things that she said in the video was that we gather together for the reason of practice. And so practice in singing song and worshiping and kind of rehearsing the things that we read in Scripture, and perhaps even things that we learned when we were growing up, coming to church and learning kind of how to practice faith and what that looks like. And one of the things that I have loved about this community for a long time over the years is that I feel that the practice of generosity and giving is kind of a through line here. It is something that you see pop up all the time. There's a need in the community. Okay, let's respond. Who can help with this? Who can help with that? And so many times things come together just in a matter of moments. Hey, I need help, feeding the kids at Hawthorne, or making sure we take care of this family. And you guys are an amazing community at responding to that. And so I think in the terms of practice, I think generosity and giving, the church provides an opportunity for people to practice that. Whereas, yes, obviously we have opportunities to give in ways, but I think that that's something that it's important for us here, and we see that happening. And I wanted to say thank you for those that have been a part of that practice. We've been gathering supplies over here the last several weeks, and we're getting ready to put together some packages that will be responding to people who are experiencing homelessness and hardship. And our Grove kids have been a part of that. You guys have been a part of bringing those donations, and so we want to say thank you for that. And we also want to say thank you. Jeff kind of opened up about what the last couple years has been like for us. This church has been through a lot in the last several years, and personally and as a community, there's been a lot of loss and a lot of unknown, a lot of uncertainty. How do we move forward? How do we keep people together when we're not able to gather? How do we respond to this? Because so much has changed in our world. And what I would want to say to you in that is that as we, Jeff mentioned at the beginning of the service that we're celebrating a baby shower today. Liz and Andy are having a baby. That it's kind of this reminder that as much as we've experienced so much hardship and so much pain and loss, I think in the last 2 weeks we've had 4 different families from our church affected by the loss of a loved one. And I remember last week I was trying to send a message out to tell people that we had lost Dave Waldstrom had passed away. In the same afternoon, I was sending out a message to say, hey, we're going to celebrate Liz and Andy's baby. And it's just this kind of picture of grief and joy, of pain and suffering, and also celebration, and how our lives are really interwoven in that way, that we show up when we have loss and we experience loss, and we come together, and we also show up to celebrate one another, and in moments in life where we come together to say, we'll be with you, we'll stand with you as you welcome this new baby. And if that's kind of picturesque of what it is to be a person of faith or a follower of Christ, I feel like that's maybe one of the best descriptions. As we look at our lives and we see that there's just patterns of loss, and there's patterns of joy, that there's patterns of pain, and there's patterns of celebration. And so I want to read a poem to you, a prayer to you this morning as we prepare to sing one more song with Liz. And it's a beautiful prayer called Partnering with God. And I think that no matter what it is that we face, whether it be a loss or something that we've suffered or a pain that we've experienced, or whether it's a joy or celebration of new life and hope, that ultimately throughout life and faith, our journey is to be partnered with God, and not to be done alone, not to be done in isolation, but to be able to have human connection with one another, and to be able to partner ourselves with God, knowing that He walks with us no matter what we face. So I want you to listen to the words of this prayer. Perhaps close your eyes and pray this with me, and let these words be a prayer to your heart today. The struggles of our world feel overwhelming, Jesus, beyond our ability to understand, let alone solve. We do not have the capacity to silence the justifications, to heal the addictions, to restore the brokenness, to repair the destruction, or to reverse the trajectories of our self-centered and even short-sighted weaknesses, our heartless and dehumanizing aggressions towards others. But we do not face these struggles alone. We have aligned ourselves with you, Jesus, and you have aligned yourself with us in taking on flesh and going through the waters and laying down your life. And you have invited us to partner with you in proclaiming good news, in freeing the imprisoned, in restoring the broken, in uniting the divided. And you have given us the capacity, the divine spirit, to be co-workers with God. And for this, we are eternally grateful. Amen. So in this invitation to partner with God and to put into practice being a community, I do want to say thank you for those that have kind of been with us and hung around for the last couple years. It's been quite a journey. We couldn't have done it without you. Those of you who have continued to give financially to the church and give of your time and volunteering and just all different ways. So we want to say thank you, and we hope that you will continue to be with us as we see what 2022 begins to unfold. There are giving baskets that are placed around. There's one up in the front and a couple in the back. So if you did come today prepared to give, I would encourage you to make sure to leave those before you go. But Liz is going to lead us in another song together, so feel free to sing along and to worship with her.
Here's my humble, here's my humble
So before I close us in prayer, I want to ask if you'll be a little more vulnerable, and if you would take those questions I gave you and your answers that you wrote down, and I don't want your names, but if you would leave those behind. I would love to put something together to kind of like mark where we were, some of the loss we experienced as a community, and to be able to look back on that over this next year, and for you to be able to visually see that. So if you want to scratch off your shopping list or whatever you had on there, or something you might not want to share, but if you would be vulnerable enough to leave your answers to there, whether you only answered one question or you answered all of them, I'd love for you guys to leave those, just for us as a leadership to kind of gauge and see where we're at. I love that you're here today. I love that you're part of this community, and I invite you to come back to be a part. It's valuable, I think, to you. I think you know it. I think there's very little that you can use to substitute the presence of a community. There's very little you can do to practice your faith alone. I think if we would all admit, we do need each other. We do need a community. Let me close this in this prayer. It's kind of a New Year prayer. It's called Who Are You, Jesus? Who are you, Jesus? It seems that people have always wanted to know, from the beginning when foreigners traveled great distances just to see you, to now when trying to answer this question can lead to heated debate and even violent conflict. Who are you really? There is no shortage of names for you: Son of God, Messiah, Lord, Anointed One, Suffering Servant. But each one feels like a doorway into a greater mystery, an invitation to dive into depths that are beyond my capacity to fathom. I want to know you, Jesus. I want to touch something of the truth of who you are. And so even as I allow my mind to wrestle with ideas about you, I open my heart that your radiant presence may shine in, may change me, and may draw me into an eternity of learning and loving who you are. Amen. Grove, we love you. We invite you to stay if you want to celebrate with Liz and Andy, and be a part of that. If not, we're going to get the coffee bar set up for that. But thank you so much. I invite you, please come back at least for the 30th when Liz is going to share her story, and that night when we're going to share stories together. But I invite you to come next Sunday as well. Guys, thank you. We love you, and we'll see you next week.